It began with whispers that spread like wildfire through the congregation of New Dawn Fellowship, a church that promised hope, salvation, and a chance at a better life. For years, thousands of people had flocked to the grand building, filling every pew with raised hands, tear-streaked faces, and faith unshakable in the man at the pulpit, Pastor Elijah Brooks. He was magnetic. His sermons blended scripture with just enough charisma to make people believe he was more than a preacher. He was chosen. They trusted him with their secrets, their marriages, their children, and their money. But behind that warm smile and polished suit, behind the booming voice that promised prosperity in God's name, there was something darker, something that would leave families broke, faith shattered, and an entire city wondering, how could a man of God do something so wicked? Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe and stay with me until the end, because what started as an ordinary Sunday service spiraled into one of the most shocking financial crimes in modern church history. And the twist that comes later will change everything you thought you knew about Pastor Brooks. To understand how Elijah Brooks stole millions, you have to understand how he rose to power. Born in a small town in Mississippi, Elijah grew up dirt poor. His father was absent. His mother washed dishes at a diner just to keep food on the table. By his teenage years, Elijah realized something. People listened when he spoke. Teachers noticed his booming voice. Classmates noticed his charm. He could persuade people, bend them to his will. At 19, he attended a revival meeting in Alabama, and it was there that he saw it. A preacher commanding thousands with every word, promising blessings in exchange for offerings. Elijah later told friends it was the moment he realized ministry was the quickest road out of poverty. By his late 20s, he founded New Dawn Fellowship. Starting small in a rented school auditorium, the church grew quickly. Brooks was not the kind of pastor who lingered on sin and judgment. He preached prosperity, health, wealth, and happiness. He told people that if they gave generously, God would multiply their gifts tenfold. People believed him. They gave when they had nothing left to give. One woman pawned her wedding ring to contribute to the church's building fund. A single mother skipped rent payments just to donate to Brooks's televised Miracle Night of Blessings. And with every donation, Brooks's suits got sharper, his cars more expensive, his smile wider. Still, no one dared question him. Who would? This was God's anointed man, or so they thought. But cracks were forming, and the first one appeared in the form of a young accountant named Rachel Moore. Rachel joined New Dawn staff in 2014. Bright, determined, and deeply religious, she saw the job as both a career move and a calling. She worked quietly, keeping the books balanced, ensuring offerings were properly recorded. But it didn't take long before she noticed discrepancies. The church's income was enormous, sometimes $300,000 in a single weekend. Yet, the official reports submitted to the board showed far less. Money was moving somewhere, and Rachel couldn't figure out where. She went to Pastor Brooks about it, nervous but determined. "Elijah, I think there's been a mistake," she told him in his plush office, where the smell of expensive cologne lingered. "The numbers don't add up." He leaned back in his leather chair, smiled that famous smile, and said, "Rachel, don't burden yourself with things that belong to the Lord. Sometimes blessings don't look neat on paper. Just have faith." Her gut told her something was wrong, but Brooks's voice, calm and soothing, made her doubt herself. For a while, then Rachel stumbled on a bank statement. Hidden in plain sight on a desk drawer Brooks had forgotten to lock, it revealed massive transfers, hundreds of thousands, funneled into private accounts linked not to the church, but to Elijah Brooks himself. Rachel froze, and in that moment, she realized this wasn't sloppy bookkeeping, this was theft. But who would believe her if she spoke out? By 2016, New Dawn Fellowship was a national brand. Brooks's sermons were broadcast on television and live-streamed online. He spoke at conferences alongside celebrity pastors. Politicians shook his hand. Athletes sat in the front row of his services. Meanwhile, the money poured in tithes, offerings, special seeds of faith, and Brooks knew how to spend it. He bought a $4.5 million mansion outside Dallas, complete with a marble staircase and gold-plated fixtures. He drove Bentleys and Lamborghinis. He flew private jets while preaching about sacrifice. To his congregation, he insisted these were signs of God's favor. He told them, "If you want what I have, sow like I sow, give like I give." And they did. Families went bankrupt believing they were investing in blessings that never came. Elderly members drained their retirement accounts to support the church. Brooks had turned their faith into his personal ATM. But he was smart, too smart to let the trail lead back to him easily. He funneled money through shell charities, fake construction projects, even offshore accounts. For years, he was untouchable, until one woman decided enough was enough. Rachel Moore. Rachel couldn't ignore what she had seen. Quietly, she began her own investigation. Late at night, after the church office was empty, she copied financial records, photographed invoices, and traced transfers. The deeper she dug, the darker it got. She uncovered nearly $32 million siphoned away over 7 years. She found evidence of forged signatures on checks, fake contracts for church construction projects that never existed, and hush money payments to individuals who had threatened to go public. One name appeared repeatedly in the documents: Genesis Group International. Officially, it was a faith-based charity. In reality, it was a shell company controlled entirely by Brooks. Rachel felt sick. This wasn't just greed. It was calculated, organized corruption, committed under the cover of God. But exposing him would mean going against one of the most powerful pastors in America. And Brooks had friends in high places. Still, Rachel pressed on, until she made a discovery that would turn the entire case upside down. In her research, Rachel found more than missing money. She found lives destroyed. She met Linda, a 68-year-old widow who had lost her home after donating her savings to the church's Heavenly Harvest campaign. She met Marcus, a father of 3 who had believed Brooks's promise that if he tithed double, God would heal his sick child. His daughter died, and Marcus was left penniless and broken. Every story Rachel uncovered added fuel to her determination. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice. She began reaching out to journalists carefully, anonymously. Most dismissed her, too afraid to go against such a powerful church. But one investigative reporter listened. And when he did, he discovered Rachel's evidence was enough to topple an empire. But Brooks was already watching her. By 2018, whispers of financial scandal reached Brooks's ears. Members began to question why the building project they'd funded for years still hadn't broken ground. Rumors swirled about Brooks's lavish lifestyle. He addressed the church one Sunday morning, his voice booming through the speakers. "Do not let the devil plant seeds of doubt. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but this house is built on truth. And anyone who speaks against your pastor is speaking against God himself." The congregation roared in applause. Many believed him, but a growing number didn't. Brooks began tightening control. Employees were monitored. Documents were locked away. Rachel found herself followed on her way home. Once, she returned to her apartment to find the lock tampered with. The message was clear: stop digging. But Rachel didn't stop. She went to federal investigators, and what they uncovered was even more shocking than anyone imagined. The FBI had received complaints about prosperity preachers before, but rarely had evidence been so clear. With Rachel's documents, they launched a covert investigation into Brooks and New Dawn Fellowship. Agents traced wire transfers overseas, monitored his private jet flights, and even subpoenaed hidden financial records. The findings were staggering. Over $45 million had been stolen from churchgoers. Funds meant for charity and community aid were instead financing Brooks's gambling trips in Las Vegas, luxury vacations in Europe, and hush payments to keep scandalous affairs quiet. And then came the biggest twist of all. Hidden among the bank records was a series of payments, not just to Brooks, but to city officials, judges, even police officers. Brooks hadn't just stolen money. He had built a network of corruption to protect himself. The pastor wasn't just a thief. He was the center of a criminal web. But the question remained: how could they bring him down without sparking chaos in the church? where thousands still believed he was untouchable. On a warm Sunday morning in 2019, Brooks stood at the pulpit, preaching about harvest season blessings. The church was packed, cameras rolling, music swelling. But outside the sanctuary, federal agents were already in position. They stormed the church mid-service. Shocked worshipers gasped as agents in jackets moved quickly down the aisles. Brooks froze, microphone in hand. "Elijah Brooks," the lead agent announced, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement." The sanctuary erupted into chaos. Some screamed, some wept, others shouted prayers, insisting their pastor was being persecuted. Brooks was led out in handcuffs, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. But as he turned his head, he smiled. Not a smile of shame, a smile of confidence, as if he knew this wasn't the end. The case captured national headlines. News anchors called him the Wolf of the Pulpit. Victims lined up to testify. Rachel Moore finally revealed herself as the whistleblower, and her courage made her both a hero and a target. Prosecutors painted Brooks as a manipulator who weaponized faith for profit. The defense argued he was being persecuted for his success, claiming every dollar was a gift freely given. The trial dragged on for months. Supporters of Brooks camped outside the courthouse, waving signs that read, "Hands off God's servant." But behind closed doors, something strange was happening. Witnesses recanted. Evidence disappeared. Judges made inexplicable rulings in Brooks's favor. It was as if his network of corruption was still at work, even with Brooks behind bars. And then, just as the trial seemed ready to deliver a guilty verdict, something happened that no one expected. On the third day of jury deliberations, news broke. Rachel Moore, the whistleblower who exposed Brooks, had vanished. Her car was found abandoned near a bridge. Her phone lay smashed on the ground. There was no sign of her. The media exploded. Was she silenced? Did she run? Or was something far darker at play? Meanwhile, Pastor Elijah Brooks sat in his cell, smiling once again. And when reporters shouted questions at him during a transfer, he simply said, "God's work is never finished." The world thought the story was over. But this was only the beginning. When federal agents stormed New Dawn Fellowship, Pastor Elijah Brooks was led away in handcuffs. For many, it felt like justice had finally arrived. Millions had been stolen, families ruined, faith shattered. And the whistleblower, Rachel Moore, had risked everything to expose him. But just as the trial reached its most crucial moment, Rachel vanished. Her car was found near a bridge, her phone smashed. No body, no answers. And suddenly, the case against Brooks, once airtight, began to unravel. What followed was a storm of corruption, betrayal, and chilling revelations. And if you thought part one was shocking, stay with me until the end, because what happened next is darker than anyone could have imagined. The morning after Rachel disappeared, panic gripped the city. News outlets ran continuous coverage. Protesters demanded answers. Was she kidnapped? Did she take her own life? Or was someone trying to silence her? Police claimed they were pursuing all leads. But quietly, investigators admitted they had almost nothing. No witnesses, no surveillance footage, no ransom note. Rachel's family insisted she would never run. She was too strong, too determined. They believed she had been silenced because without her, the government's case against Brooks was crippled. And they weren't wrong. Within days, the prosecution stumbled. Rachel was supposed to testify in the final stage of the trial. Without her first-hand account of the financial records, the jury's confidence wavered. And Pastor Brooks? From behind bars, he smiled, always smiling. As the trial dragged on, Brooks's supporters grew louder. They filled the courthouse steps, singing hymns, holding signs that read, "Hands off God's servant," and "This is persecution, not prosecution." Some even claimed Rachel's disappearance was staged by the government to frame Brooks. Others insisted she had been struck down by divine judgment for daring to go against the anointed. Inside the courtroom, Brooks leaned into this narrative. He claimed the case was a spiritual battle, and that the devil was using the justice system to try to destroy him. It worked. Some jurors looked uneasy. Others openly questioned whether Brooks was guilty of anything more than receiving donations from willing believers. The truth, the hard evidence, was slipping away. And then came another twist. While the public focused on Brooks and the missing whistleblower, a smaller group of federal agents continued digging. They suspected Rachel's disappearance wasn't random. It was part of something bigger. Their suspicion grew when they uncovered records showing Brooks had wired money to offshore accounts even after his arrest. How could a man in jail move millions unless someone on the outside was helping him? The agents traced the money to Genesis Group International, the same shell charity Rachel had discovered. And from there to the bank accounts of politicians, police officers, and even judges. The network was real, and it was powerful. Brooks had not only stolen millions, he had bought protection at every level, which meant Rachel's disappearance might not have been about silencing one woman. It was about protecting an empire. Amid the chaos, one voice refused to be silenced. Investigative journalist David Lawson. Lawson had been following the story since Rachel first leaked documents to him. After her disappearance, he doubled down. He published exposés on Brooks's lavish lifestyle, the offshore accounts, and the political allies protecting him. His reports enraged Brooks's supporters. Lawson's home was vandalized. He received death threats daily. One night, his car was rammed off the road by an unknown driver. He survived, barely. Still, he pressed on. And then, Lawson revealed something no one had seen coming. Through a confidential source, Lawson obtained a recording, grainy, muffled, but damning. On it, Brooks was heard speaking to an unidentified man. "The girl knows too much," Brooks's voice said. Pause. Then, "Handle it." The tape sent shockwaves across the country. If authentic, it was proof Brooks had ordered Rachel's disappearance. But here's the catch. The tape couldn't be authenticated. There was no timestamp, no verifiable source. Still, it was enough to ignite outrage. Victims of Brooks's schemes protested outside the courthouse. Families who had lost everything demanded justice. Yet inside, Brooks's attorneys dismissed the tape as a fabrication. And disturbingly, the jury seemed to agree. After months of testimony, missing evidence, and endless drama, the jury returned its verdict. On charges of wire fraud and embezzlement, guilty. On charges of conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering, not guilty. Brooks was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, a light sentence considering the $45 million stolen and the lives ruined. For victims, it felt like betrayal. For supporters, it was vindication. But for Brooks, it was exactly what he wanted. Because while the world thought he had lost, in reality, his empire was still intact. His loyalists controlled the money. His network remained in power. And even from behind bars, Brooks still pulled the strings. Inside prison, Brooks reinvented himself. He called himself the prison prophet. He preached to inmates, gaining followers behind bars. He wrote books that his congregation bought in bulk. He held weekly live-stream sermons broadcast from prison that drew thousands. He was no longer just a pastor. He was a martyr, a man who claimed he had been crucified by the system for his faith. Money continued flowing. His supporters sent millions through donations that found their way to his family and associates. And then came the most chilling twist yet. 2 years after Rachel's disappearance, a woman walked into a small-town sheriff's office in Texas. She was thin, pale, disoriented. She carried no ID, just a slip of paper with one name written on it. Rachel Moore. The deputy stared at her. "You're supposed to be dead." Rachel had been missing for over 700 days. And now here she was, alive. But something was wrong. She barely spoke. When she did, her voice trembled. She claimed she had been held captive, moved between safe houses, and threatened never to testify again. Her story was fragmented, confusing. Some believed her. Others suspected she had been brainwashed or perhaps had struck a deal with Brooks's network. Whatever the truth, Rachel's return reopened wounds. And it raised a terrifying question. If she had been silenced for 2 years, how deep did Brooks's power really go? Rachel eventually told investigators one detail that changed everything. She claimed the man who kidnapped her wasn't a stranger. He was someone from inside the church, someone she had trusted. She refused to name him at first, terrified of the consequences. But weeks later, she finally whispered a name. It wasn't just anyone. It was Associate Pastor Daniel Hayes, Brooks's right-hand man, the smiling preacher who had stood beside him every Sunday, leading prayers and collecting offerings. Hayes had been the loyal shadow, the good cop to Brooks's fiery sermons. Congregants loved him. No one suspected him. But according to Rachel, Hayes wasn't just complicit. He was the architect behind the network, the one who managed the offshore accounts, arranged payoffs, and ensured Brooks's empire survived behind bars. Brooks was the face. Hayes was the machine. And if Rachel was right, then Brooks's imprisonment was meaningless. The real mastermind was still free. Late one night, as Rachel prepared to testify again, her protection detail received a call. A chilling message from an untraceable number. You can cage the pastor, but you'll never stop the prophet's kingdom. Moments later, an explosion ripped through the safe house where Rachel was staying. Fire lit up the night sky, and as emergency crews rushed to the scene, one question hung in the air. Had the whistleblower survived again? Or had Pastor Elijah Brooks's empire finally silenced her for good? The safe house explosion was supposed to be impossible. Rachel Moore, the whistleblower who had survived 2 years in captivity, was under round-the-clock federal protection, guards at the doors, surveillance cameras, a location so secret that even her family didn't know where she was. And yet, in the dead of night, fire tore through the building. The windows blew out. The roof collapsed. By dawn, the once secure refuge was a smoldering ruin. The world held its breath. Was Rachel dead this time? Or had she once again escaped the clutches of Pastor Elijah Brooks's empire? But what no one realized then was that the fire wasn't just an attack on Rachel. It was a message from an empire that was far from finished. Stay with me until the end, because this story takes us deeper into corruption, betrayal, and a chilling new truth about the pastor who stole millions. When firefighters pulled the charred remains of the safe house apart, they found something eerie. 3 burned bodies, unrecognizable. At first, everyone assumed one of them was Rachel, but DNA testing revealed otherwise. The bodies belonged to 2 federal marshals and a woman in her late 40s, an agent assigned to Rachel's detail. Rachel herself? Gone. Again. The case grew stranger. In the wreckage, investigators found traces of a professional explosive device. Not a random gas leak. Not an accident. Someone had planned this. Someone had known exactly where Rachel was, which raised the terrifying question. Who inside the system had betrayed her location? Back inside his cell, Pastor Elijah Brooks received the news with that same unnerving smile. Guards said he whistled hymns all morning. Later that day, he preached to inmates about fire purging impurities and the Lord protecting his chosen. To his followers, the timing was no coincidence. To investigators, it was confirmation that Brooks's network was alive and operational, even with him locked away. But when asked about Rachel, Brooks simply chuckled. "You people still don't understand," he said. "Rachel was never your witness. She was always ours." The statement sent chills through the room. What did he mean? 2 weeks later, the answer began to emerge. A video appeared online. Grainy, shaky, clearly recorded in secret. It showed Rachel Moore alive. But this wasn't the Rachel the world remembered. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, her voice flat, robotic. In the video, she said, "The government is lying. Pastor Brooks is innocent. I fabricated evidence. I was manipulated. The truth is, God's servant is being persecuted." The video went viral overnight. Brooks's supporters hailed it as proof he'd been framed. Victims of the church were devastated, and investigators were left scrambling. Had Rachel been brainwashed? Was she speaking under duress? Or had she truly turned against the case she built? Whatever the answer, one thing was clear. The most important witness in the trial of the decade was now discredited. Behind the scenes, a new figure was stepping into the light. Associate Pastor Daniel Hayes. Rachel had once whispered his name as the man who orchestrated her abduction. And now, with Brooks behind bars, Hayes positioned himself as the acting shepherd of New Dawn Fellowship. He rebranded the church as the Kingdom of the Prophet. Attendance surged. Donations doubled. Hayes preached fiery sermons about persecution and victory. And though Brooks sat in prison, his face appeared on screens during every service. His words transmitted through live streams. His books sold in stacks. It was clear. The empire hadn't crumbled. It had simply evolved. But investigators noticed something strange. While Brooks preached from prison, Hayes was quietly buying up real estate, expanding charities, and opening spiritual training centers across the country. And millions of dollars were flowing into them. The same pattern Rachel had uncovered years before. David Lawson, the journalist who had nearly died exposing Brooks, saw through the facade. He began connecting the dots. Through leaked documents, Lawson uncovered that Hayes wasn't just running the church. He was expanding it into a global business network. The training centers were shell companies. The charities were funnels. And the money, it was bigger than ever. According to Lawson's investigation, over $75 million had been moved in just 2 years. And Brooks, from prison, still received his cut. Lawson wrote, "Pastor Brooks may be behind bars, but the true crime is happening in plain sight. And Daniel Hayes is the heir to the empire of corruption." But before Lawson could publish his most explosive findings, something happened that shook him to his core. One night, Lawson returned to his apartment to find his front door ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen, but on his desk sat a single Bible, open to a passage in the book of Jeremiah. "Do not go where I send you not, or you shall surely perish." Next to it was a flash drive. Against his better judgment, Lawson plugged it in. The drive contained a single file, a video of Rachel Moore, this time more coherent, her voice shaking. She whispered, "You don't understand. Hayes is worse than Brooks. He isn't just stealing money. He's building something bigger, something dangerous. And if you don't stop him, you'll all see it." The video cut to black. Lawson rushed the footage to federal investigators. They were skeptical. Was this another staged video? Or was Rachel finally speaking freely? But then came the bombshell. Buried in the metadata of the file was a GPS coordinate. Agents traced it to a compound outside Houston, an abandoned warehouse repurposed into a sprawling campus. From the outside, it looked like a church retreat center. But when agents infiltrated it undercover, what they found stunned them. Dozens of people were living inside, sleeping in bunks, working long hours, donating every penny they had. It wasn't a retreat center. It was a cult compound. And at the top of it all was Daniel Hayes. Hayes called the compound the sanctuary. To his followers, it was a holy refuge from a sinful world. To investigators, it looked like organized exploitation. Former members later described grueling labor, constant surveillance, and punishment for questioning Hayes's teachings. Families were cut off from loved ones. Members were told to sign over homes, cars, and life savings to the kingdom. And Hayes's sermons grew darker. He no longer preached only prosperity. He preached war. "The world will not understand us," he declared. "They will persecute us. That is why we must build God's kingdom here, with our own hands, with our own lives." What had started as fraud and embezzlement was morphing into something far more dangerous. A radical movement with money, power, and blind devotion. And Brooks, from prison, continued to bless it all. Late one evening, investigators monitoring the compound intercepted a call between Hayes and Brooks. "Hayes, the sanctuary is ready. The followers are prepared. All we need is your word." "Brooks?" "Then it begins." The next morning, dozens of vans left the compound, spreading out across multiple states. No one knew where they were going or what they were planning. And in a chilling final twist, federal surveillance picked up a new name repeated in their encrypted messages. A name that had never appeared before. Project Exodus. No one knew what it meant, but they were about to find out. For weeks, encrypted chatter echoed between prison phones, burner numbers, and secret compound radios. Nobody outside the circle knew what it meant. Nobody understood what was coming. But when vans began rolling out of the sanctuary, the cult-like compound built by Pastor Daniel Hayes, federal investigators knew they were running out of time. And at the center of it all was still one man, Pastor Elijah Brooks. Even from behind bars, his influence reached beyond the walls, beyond the city, beyond reason itself. This was no longer just a story of stolen millions. This was a story of power, faith twisted into fanaticism, and a dangerous plan that could change everything. Stay with me until the end, because this is where the rise and fall of Pastor Elijah Brooks reaches its terrifying conclusion. The first signs appeared in small towns across the South. Congregants from New Dawn Fellowship quietly sold their homes, abandoned jobs, and disappeared overnight. Within days, hundreds had left. By the end of the week, thousands. They all migrated to safe houses connected to the sanctuary compound, guided by Hayes's lieutenants. Investigators pieced it together. Project Exodus was a mass migration. Hayes was gathering an army of believers, loyal, unquestioning, and willing to give everything. Their stated mission? To build a new kingdom that would defy government control and prepare for what Hayes called the final harvest. To outsiders, it looked like a cult gone rogue. But to federal authorities, it looked like domestic terrorism waiting to happen. A raid on one of the satellite safe houses confirmed their fears. Inside, agents found stockpiles of weapons. Assault rifles, shotguns, body armor, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. This was no longer just about money laundering or fraud. Hayes was preparing his followers for war. And when agents traced the supply chain, they uncovered something even more chilling. The weapons had been purchased using funds still connected to Brooks's original embezzlement network. Even in prison, Brooks was financing a movement that could destabilize entire communities. But amid the chaos, a voice from the shadows returned. Rachel Moore. She had survived the safe house explosion, barely, rescued in secret by an anonymous ally who spirited her out before the flames consumed everything. She had stayed underground, hiding, gathering strength. Now she resurfaced with one goal: to finally destroy Brooks's empire once and for all. In a meeting with federal agents, Rachel revealed the final piece of the puzzle. She had once been forced to code financial systems for Hayes under captivity, and she knew where the last of the stolen millions were hidden. A secret account. The war chest fueling Project Exodus. Cutting it off might cripple the movement, but to get to it, Rachel would have to go back into the very world she had escaped. Undercover agents, guided by Rachel, infiltrated the sanctuary compound. What they found was terrifying. Hundreds of followers stood chanting in unison, Hayes at the pulpit, fire in his eyes. On giant screens behind him, Pastor Brooks's recorded sermons played on loop. His voice like thunder. The kingdom will rise. Babylon will fall. Stand with me, children, and your reward will be eternal. Hayes raised his arms. The time has come. Project Exodus begins tonight. The crowd roared. But before Hayes could give the final command, federal agents stormed the compound. Flashbangs erupted. Screams filled the air. What followed was chaos. Followers clashing with law enforcement, some resisting violently, others dropping to their knees in prayer. And at the center of it all, Hayes tried to escape. Rachel, wearing a bulletproof vest, cornered Hayes near the underground vault where millions in cash were stored. He sneered at her. "You think you can stop this? Brooks is the prophet. I am his sword. Even if I fall, others will rise." But Rachel stood firm. For years, she had carried the weight of his crimes, the trauma of captivity, the guilt of victims who had lost everything. "Not tonight," she said. As agents swarmed in, Hayes was taken down, handcuffed, screaming prophecies about the kingdom's return. The vault was seized. The stolen millions finally recovered. For many, it felt like the nightmare was over. But Brooks wasn't finished yet. The same night Hayes was arrested, Brooks staged his final act from inside prison. Using smuggled cell phones and loyal inmates, he orchestrated a riot. Guards were overpowered, cells thrown open. Chaos consumed the prison. And in the middle of it, Brooks emerged, standing on a cafeteria table, arms outstretched, preaching to the mob. They thought they could chain me, but God's servant cannot be silenced. The kingdom is here, and tonight, we walk free. For hours, it seemed like Brooks might actually escape. The prison burned. Sirens wailed. National news carried live footage. But at dawn, tactical units stormed the facility. Tear gas filled the air. Brooks was dragged out, coughing, his once immaculate suit now tattered prison garb. Still, he smiled. Even in defeat, he smiled. Months later, the trials concluded. Daniel Hayes was sentenced to life in prison for racketeering, weapons trafficking, and conspiracy to commit terrorism. Elijah Brooks, already serving time, received an additional 75 years, ensuring he would die behind bars. His empire dismantled, his followers scattered, his millions seized. The once beloved pastor who had stolen from his flock in the name of God had become a symbol of corruption, greed, and the dangers of blind faith. Rachel Moore testified one last time, her voice steady, her courage undeniable. She had endured captivity, betrayal, and attempts on her life, but she stood tall. For the victims who had lost everything, her testimony brought some measure of justice. And yet, the scars remained. Just when the world thought the story was over, a final revelation emerged. Inside Brooks's confiscated belongings, investigators found a handwritten letter, addressed not to Hayes, not to his followers, but to someone else. It read, "My time is short. The kingdom must endure. The mantle will pass to you. Lead them when I am gone." At the bottom was a name, not Hayes, not any known associate. It was the name of a young preacher in another state, a man barely in his 30s, charismatic, rising fast, and the letter was dated only weeks before Brooks's arrest. The implication was chilling. Brooks hadn't just built an empire, he had built a succession plan. So yes, Pastor Elijah Brooks will die in prison. Daniel Hayes will never see freedom again. The millions stolen have been reclaimed. But somewhere out there, another preacher is already rising. Another pulpit already echoing with promises of wealth and salvation. Another empire already waiting to be born. Because corruption doesn't end with one man. And the true cost of blind faith is that it always finds another face to wear. The story of the pastor who stole millions from his church has ended. But the next chapter of deception and betrayal? It may already be beginning.